Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly public cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and more. From predictable pricing to flexible configurations to world-class support, you'll get access to all the infrastructure services you need to grow. Plus, DigitalOcean's community provides over 2,000 tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. So get started today on DigitalOcean with a free $100 credit at do.co/cloudcast. That's do.co/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It is a beautiful sunny day here. Things are starting to warm up. The spring is starting to become part of regular life, and it's good to be back with everybody. Let's go ahead and jump into the cloud news of the week, because there was a number of events both last week and this week that created some news that are worth taking a look at. Last week, there were both the DockerCon event and the Open Infrastructure Summit, which previously was the OpenStack Summit. Unfortunately, both of those shows tend to be sort of slowing down in terms of attendance. I think what we've seen is the buzz around both of those shows has begun to really pick up and move over to the KubeCon Kubernetes-centric show. So KubeCon, which will be in Barcelona here in a few weeks. Docker did announce the announcement of Docker Enterprise 3.0, which includes, updates to Docker Enterprise, Docker Application, which is based on a new framework that is based on a project called CNAB. They announced Docker Kubernetes Service. So Docker has really sort of fully shifted away from Swarm. Swarm is still a supported thing, but shifting more and more to their focus on Kubernetes, which is really, again, where that trend in the industry is moving away from kind of proprietary or non-Kubernetes container-centric technologies over to container-centric technologies. The other thing, the announcements from this week, events this week, probably the two that are going on, we're going to hit on one of them. Both Red Hat Summit is happening this week, as well as Microsoft Build. We'll cover the Microsoft Build announcements next week. So big news out of the Red Hat Summit from a Red Hat perspective. A couple of things, especially around OpenShift. Do we talk about cloud technologies or Kubernetes technologies? Red Hat OpenShift 4 GA'd. This was really bringing together the OpenShift technologies as well as the CoreOS technologies. All of those Kubernetes technologies came together. A lot around automation, around immutable infrastructure, bringing together service mesh technology, Istio technology, Knative serverless technology, now part of OpenShift, as well as a number of other technologies to help improve the developer experience. So that was a big announcement at Red Hat Summit. The other one was the GA of a fully managed partnership, fully managed service between Microsoft Azure and Red Hat. So the Azure Red Hat OpenShift service is now GA'd and available through Azure. So this essentially makes OpenShift a native service on top of Azure, part of Azure, jointly managed by Microsoft and Red Hat. So those were sort of the big announcements from a cloud perspective that came out of Red Hat Summit. Like I said, we will cover some of the announcements for Microsoft Build, both in the show notes this week, but also in subsequent shows, because there will be a number of things there. So with that, we're going to wrap up our cloud news of the week. We're going to get to our final show in the 300s. This is show 399. We will be having an entire series around sort of us hitting the 400 milestone. Very, very excited about those, but also want to, again, thank our sponsors, both Snowflake and DigitalOcean, for being sponsors of this show. Really appreciate them being on board. And with that, let's get to our interview. Today's show is sponsored by Snowflake, the only data warehouse built for the cloud. Today, organizations need the agility that rapid data insights bring to stay a step ahead of the competition. With Snowflake, you can instantly and infinitely scale your data warehouse with the touch of a button, delivering deep insights at any time for all your users. So start your journey today towards data-driven decision-making by going to snowflake.com/cloudcast. That's snowflake.com/cloudcast. And we're back. Good to be back with everybody today. You know, folks, a lot of you know we're going to be hitting on our 400th episode here in a couple of weeks or so. And before that, we wanted to make sure, before we kind of dove back into a little bit of a time machine, a little bit of looking back at the show, we wanted to make sure that we could, hit on some new stuff before we get to that. So one of the things that we've always been focused on, at least for the last couple of years, is there's been a lot of trends happening around trying to make developers more productive, trying to make platforms for developers simpler. We've seen a lot of trends kind of emerge, and some have grown and some have shrunk. And so we're always looking for that next company, that next technology that hopefully is going to make things easier for developers and expand the pool of developers that can make cool applications and change businesses. So wanted to introduce you to a new company today. So we'll get a really cool chance to talk to Matthew Creager, who is co-founder and VP of Developer Relations at Manifold. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me, and congratulations on 400 episodes. That's huge.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, before we dive into Manifold, you've been around this space for a little while. Why don't you give folks a little bit of your background about what you were doing prior to Manifold, and then maybe give us a sense of why you guys decided to go start the company and be in this space of trying to help developers be more productive.
Oh boy. Okay. So how far should I rewind? So maybe I'll start with BlackBerry. So I was fresh into my software engineering career, and I was very excited to join this Canadian tech legend, the inventor of the smartphone. At least that's how we credit it in Canada. I'm not sure how people talk about it here in the States.
Yeah.
But the thing that I kept on being frustrated with there was just how long it took to get a new piece of technology added to the stack that we were using. It took weeks to get a VM provision, and if you wanted to bring something in, a managed service in from the outside, then you were going through legal, and you were talking months. I was really excited about this tool called Node.js, which now everybody knows about, but at the time it was brand new, and I was actually trying to get that. I wanted to use it internally. I wanted to use it as a way to deal with real-time data processing. And there was only one company at the time using it in production, and that company happened to be in my hometown of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And they were organizing a hackathon, and I showed up and participated in the hackathon. I didn't win the hackathon, but I did end up joining them at GoInstant. GoInstant was a developer tool focused on real-time data streaming. It was kind of the first classic use case of Node.js, and it was the first platform I'd worked on that was really focused on bringing developers an API. I accidentally wrote one successful library, ended up hitting the talk track, and kind of stumbled into developer relations as the only person on the team that seemed to have any interest in it. We were acquired by Salesforce, and as a result, I ended up joining Heroku, moving to San Francisco and joining Heroku and building the developer relations team there. Through that process, I kind of discovered, honestly, they were focused on the enterprise, and I understood the enterprise and enterprise use cases. I'd spent time as an enterprise software engineer, but I fell in love with the Heroku add-ons ecosystem. I just love the community of people that were building tools for developers. Obviously, that was near and dear to my heart because I just spent some time doing it. And that's the part of Heroku that I felt most attached to. There was new trends popping up. Things like serverless and microservices were going mainstream. And as developers started to look for platforms that supported those architectures natively, they'd lament leaving the add-ons ecosystem behind. Like that was the thing that they would miss. And I just didn't feel that I felt like they shouldn't have to choose. They shouldn't have to choose between a platform that made it easy to adopt their architecture of choice, and using cloud services that made them happy and productive. And that wasn't just happening at Heroku. That was happening at AWS. AWS has cloud services that you can't find anywhere else. Azure has cloud services that you can't find anywhere else. There's massive independent cloud services that are more difficult to adopt if you're on a platform like AWS. And I think we started Manifold because we wanted to tear down those walls. We wanted to make it easy for developers to adopt those services regardless of where they were building their applications. Yeah. So that's kind of how we got there. Yeah. At least that's how I got there. If you ask my CEO, it's because we had to hand the keys over to Salesforce, and he couldn't believe that he didn't know who had signed up for which accounts and where the credentials were. And he couldn't believe there was no way to centralize configuration management.
Right. Yeah, no, and I want to touch on all those things. For us, it's always cool to find, founders of companies who essentially kind of lived with the problem, started to build some things and said, this is, I think this is a common problem that other people have. I think there's people that if we delivered something that solved this problem that you toiled over for a while, we think there's markets for that there. So to me, that's always a very cool starting point for where companies get started versus just saying, well, I spun out of a VC, we kind of saw a market, so we just thought we would build some technology. So, the pain tends to build interesting outcomes.
And at the same time, you had this huge ecosystem with Node.js, the NPM community. You had this huge package ecosystem that was literally just exploding. They had a huge number of packages. You could find a package for anything. And I was expecting that the ecosystem of cloud services to explode in the same way. And I couldn't figure out why it just wasn't happening. And so that was like, we were passionate about helping companies like reach developer communities and helping developer communities identify these trending new services and adopt them.
Right.
So, it was definitely a problem we were passionate about.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. I always say there's sort of one truth I know about developers, and that they would like things to be simpler. They would like certain things to just get taken care of for them. And then you dig into that a little bit and you go, okay, I don't know if there's any other sort of universal truths. Like they want things the way they want them, and they want to do things certain ways. I look at Manifold, and sometimes my analyst brain kind of kicks in and I go, okay, what is this thing? Like, I get what it does, but it feels to me to a certain extent like there's part of it that feels a little bit like the low code sort of phenomenon, like you're making it simpler to integrate services. There's part of it that feels a little bit like PaaS, you push code and it just runs. There's part of it that feels like, hey, you've simplified CI and CD. Like, am I making a mistake looking at it through all these sort of defined lenses and not looking at it, like you said, just going, the thing I want is, I want development to be simple, I want deployment to be simple, and I don't want to be bound to sort of like specific cloud worlds. Is that a better way to maybe think about how you guys have built this together?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's so okay. So to your first point, that echoes of something that Isaac Schluter said to me pretty recently, the creator of NPM. He said that if they want to introduce a new feature and they add in 2 commands what they could have accomplished in 1 command, nobody will adopt it. No one will use it. That's like even one too many commands is just too many commands to get mass adoption. So I think that is, developers want simple, that's for sure.
Yeah.
If I had one thing that I would say is true, I think that is that developers will find a better way to do things, and they'll find it pretty soon, like sooner than you expect them to.
Right.
And then it's about how easy it is. So they stumble across a new architecture, platform, or tool, and then it's how quickly can they adopt it and what's it going to cost in terms of effort and dollars. But so to your question, like where does Manifold fit in the world of PaaS and low code? I think that's actually a pretty great intersection. That's a pretty great intersection. It's a pretty wonderful place to be, I think.
And I say that like sometimes, like I realize there's times, and I've worked with a whole bunch of companies that have kind of gotten started, and they go, there's a part of you that goes, well, what do you like? Because people kind of do comparative things. And then people will go like, we're not really like anything else because they made certain choices or they had certain constraints and we sort of unlock those things. So, don't put us into a bucket. So that was kind of my thinking was like, am I making a mistake trying to define something that people know because maybe this isn't intended to go down that path?
Yeah, maybe that's true because I think here's sort of how I look at it now. You've got a platform like Heroku, which makes it really easy for developers to get an application up and running. But then you've got a technology like Kubernetes that makes building platforms like Heroku much simpler. And so I think we're going to start to see platforms that are really tailored to specific use cases. And I mean that's already happening. You look at something like Netlify that makes it really easy to deploy static applications and connect them to GitHub and then spin up previews of your static apps. Why shouldn't we be able to use a composition of these platforms? Why shouldn't we be able to use Netlify for our static applications and something like Iron.io or Prefab to do background workers, and then have some core infrastructure running on DigitalOcean or Azure or AWS? Like we should be able to use the best tools for the job, and we shouldn't then, as a result of making those decisions, be limited in our choice of managed services. If this was happening in the open source ecosystem, if picking a particular framework meant that you couldn't get access to NPM's entire package ecosystem. We just wouldn't stand for it. But when it happens in cloud services and managed services, for some reason, we just accept it. And I don't think that we should.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that premise. It's like it goes back to the thing that you said, like engineers will find ways, to get around friction, to get around problems and so forth. And at the end of the day, all these services out in the cloud have an API. I mean, it's intended to somebody to program against it, to link things together. So yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a need to justify why you're trying to do it. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Developers are really good at lifting each other up. We agree on standards. It makes it possible for you to build an application and for me to leverage what you build to make the application I'm better, and vice versa. And that just compounds over the entire ecosystem. And it means that today we can do in 10 minutes what 5 years ago would have taken an entire team weeks, and then would have had significant operational overhead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where is that friction? I think the friction really happens in two places. It's, there's this entire new workflow that's developed around evaluating the tools and services that we want to bring into our application. And, if you want to bring a package in, you NPM install it, or depending on what language you're in, and then you can experiment with it. But with a cloud service, you've got to go set up an account. You've got to go and add a credit card, because they probably, if it's sending text messages or sending email, then they're probably experiencing fraud. So they've got to gate you at least a little bit. Then you've got to go and read through their documentation. And then finally, you've got to install a package and spin up a sandbox so that you can play with it. And then you've got to go and get credentials you can use in production. And it's no wonder that there isn't a greater adoption of cloud services. And if you flip the script a little bit and you step into the world of a provider, of a tool provider that is trying to reach developers, well, now they've got all of these fragmented communities. They want to reach each language community, and each language community and framework community has its own approach. It has its own flavor.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to speak authentically to each of these communities. They have to be able to build great clients or agents, and they have to be able to create documentation that makes sense to that audience. And so there's a mountain they have to climb before they can actually get their tool into the hands of developers and get feedback on it and whether it's useful or not, and then start iterating on it. And we have to just knock all those walls down and make it really simple for developers to adopt a new tool and inject it into a workflow, experiment with it, and decide whether it's the right tool for them, and then to take it through staging and production.
Yeah.
So that's our job.
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking, you and I have been talking about kind of the problem space and a little bit of like classifying it. We really haven't dug in very much of what Manifold does. And I think the thing that drew me to it, which I thought was very interesting, one is, you take a set of developers, like you said, they have something in mind as to what they want to build. You guys make it really easy to go, oh, you want a database as a service, you need a queue, you need some compute resources. Like, essentially think about all the, a chunk of the cloud services that are out there. You guys just make those look like things that you can just kind of go a la carte, get and integrate. And then the other thing that really I liked about it was this idea that it won't just be one developer, it'll be teams of people, and you've got to be able to create sort of a collaboration environment around it. Like you said, to share common projects or share billing keys and so forth. Like, talk a little bit about just what's the experience that people have with Manifold.
Yeah. So to your first point, like we actually started with a workflow that was really tailored to a single developer. And the feedback, and that was really about us putting together a quick MVP. And the feedback was like, well, the friction points are really around how I share this with the rest of my team. So if you're a developer and using Manifold today, yeah, you're going to do exactly what you described. You're going to decide you want a database or you want an APM. You want to send email, so you grab Mailgun. And you get this uniform view of what these services look like and how much they cost. So that's the first kind of key point, is we smooth out the discovery process. You can just compare them and decide which makes the most sense for you. We tell you which languages they support, and we help you find their documentation, and we kind of just give you a uniform view of the product itself. And then we make it really easy to get up and running. So you click one button, and now you've provisioned, a free instance of Mailgun. You've got a set of credentials, and you've got a link that you can click that will take you right into Mailgun's dashboard. And as maybe you experiment with it, you decide, yeah, this is the right tool for you. And so you decide you're going to take it into staging and production and deliver it to the rest of your team. So you provision another instance of Mailgun. This one is designed for production. It's costing you a little bit more each month. and you add other people to the project that contains Mailgun and all your other services. And now that's all they need to go and to use Mailgun in development, to make sure that it's working in production, to get from the project into the actual dashboard for Mailgun. And at the end of the month, you get one bill with all of the services associated with that project. So you're not trying to figure out which services are being used where and how much you're paying for them.
Right. And that second part really, like you said, kind of touches on your other co-founder, your CEO's pain point, which is like, how do I figure out who's paying for all this stuff? And how do I, make sure if we put a credit card against it, it's got enough of balance to be able to deal with stuff. I can imagine
it's a small thing that's really annoying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I can imagine, like you said, as you went from kind of the initial approach of single developer to this group thing, people start to realize, when there's not kind of transparency or obvious communication between groups, a lot of stuff gets done multiple times. You get overlap between things. You're not necessarily learning between groups. It feels like the more group-centric, kind of collaborative-centric shared thing is going to reduce a lot of that just doing things over and over again. I didn't know somebody was doing this. I didn't, how did you set that thing up? Like, it feels like that becomes much more visible and transparent between teams.
Yeah, and the small part of that experience that we've all suffered through is you add a new person to your team, they pull down the repo and they try to run the application and it doesn't work. It tells you that it's missing configuration. And then you try to track down whoever it is that's going to set you up with your database credentials or set you up with your Mailgun credentials or set you up with your APM credentials in development. Like, we've all had that experience, and it's so much easier when you pull down the repo and not only are the packages that you need installed, but all the configuration is made available for that environment. And then when something happens in staging or production, you don't have to try to figure out where to look. You know that it's all going to be in one place. You're going to go there and you're going to go through the tools and figure out which one you need to diagnose and jump into that dashboard.
Yeah. Help me understand a little bit. It wasn't completely clear to me. Is Manifold software that teams are going to download themselves and it'll help kind of connect the dots, or is it a SaaS service, or is it some combination of both?
So yeah, it's a combination of both, because it really depends what tooling you're using today. So if you're on we tend to be on the two extremes in terms of use case. So we end up in startups that are small, and in some cases, they'll just provision services. They'll decrypt and copy their credentials right out of the dashboard, and then put them, do it the old-fashioned way and put them in a .env file or something. And that's fine. When you're small, maybe that's the simplest workflow. On the other side of the extreme, you've got you have small teams inside of large companies who are managing a ton of different services. Some of them are they're buying through Manifold, and some of them they're adding configuration. We support generic configuration as well as cloud service configuration. And in the second case, you're probably using something like Kubernetes or Terraform to define your infrastructure and code. And we just make it simple for you to, like with Kubernetes, we have a CRD, so it feels native. You're able to describe managed services the same way you would your local services. With Terraform, we have a provider. So you're able to just make sure that the secrets you need to use those services are injected into the appropriate environments, and you get to use the tools you're already using.
Right. Yeah. And that piece was interesting because it was, like you mentioned, like you could deploy it to things that are, again, then well known, say by like operations team, but you don't care. It could be Kubernetes, it could be Terraform on top of AWS or DigitalOcean or something like that. So that is very, very cool.
And if you just need a generic CI/CD workflow, then we just have a command line tool that you can plug in, and it'll inject credentials just using a token.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit. Help me understand. There's some. As I was looking through it, obviously there's kind of, as we see with a lot of models, there's a kind of community or sort of free set of tools that are available, and then there's enterprise edition. But there's kind of this talk about, hey, certain things are free. We want to expose the best services. Help me understand if I'm a user or a customer, like what is sort of the business model, and what's maybe the relationship that you guys have with these partner companies that you expose?
Yeah, honestly, it's really simple. We just take a percentage of subscriptions that are set up through Manifold.
Okay, cool.
And
easy.
Yeah, and that kind of ties our own success to the success of partners on the platform. but it means the developers aren't paying for any of the tools they use through Manifold.
Gotcha. Very cool. So let me ask you one last question, because it's been interesting, and I hope folks are kind of getting exposed to what can happen when things become simpler. Any good examples of companies, whether they're, like you said, one of the startups on the startup end or bigger company end, just examples of kind of things they've done or feedback they've given you about how it's changed how they build applications or better collaborative?
Oh man, there's a few good examples. I'll go with one of my favorites. So I think there's a company called Harbor that is taking on the construction space. So they help contractors bring in people who are going to work on the site. So if you need to bring in a plumber, they let you hire a plumber through the platform. Honestly, it's kind of a marketplace for contractors. And one thing they talked about is that there's always so much consumer. All of their demand is driven by their consumers. So consumers see a new cool piece of tech. So they see voice and video support built into an application, and they say, well, why can't we have that? And the expectation is that the company's called Harbor. That the expectation is that Harbor just adds it to their platform. And what they've been able to do with Manifold is the moment somebody says something like, hey, we want voice and video, can you set that up for us? Or we want to receive a text message when somebody shows up on our site, or we want to see an email summary of the progress of the work, that they're able to just very quickly introduce those services to their stack. Effectively, they're getting the request, they're going and evaluating the services, they're introducing it to their stack, and then they're offering it to their users within a few weeks, which in the contractor space is just that level of innovation, that pace of innovation is just unheard of. So I feel like that's the example I like to use.
Yeah, no, I think construction is always an interesting example, because I think to a certain extent people just see things getting built and it's building materials or whatever, and they forget it's a massive supply chain. There are people that always want the latest stuff. There's a lot of technology that's possible to make that whole experience much better and much better controlled and stuff. So yeah, those are always very, very cool examples to me.
Yeah, and the cost of their mistakes are huge. If they get the wrong person on the job or they make a mistake, it slows the whole project down for weeks, and they end up, it costs them a fortune. Whereas if we make a mistake when we're building something, we just kind of scrub it and start again.
Right. And like you said, they typically they're not optimized around software developers. They're optimized around some other things, and that's just part of what they do. So things have to be simple for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, very cool. Matthew, I appreciate the time. I hope folks enjoyed the introduction we had for Manifold today. I know for myself, we're always looking for, number one, people that are passionate about it. They've lived with the problems. They're building the technology. But number two, making things easier for the market, right? And with cloud being so explosive in terms of the number of services, the things that you guys are doing, appear to be very, very powerful. So thank you for the time today. If folks want to, either reach out to you or learn more about Manifold, what are the best places to kind of go, or maybe events that you might be at coming up soon?
Yeah, so I think the event that we're at that's right around the corner. Well, we're going to be at DockerCon this week, so if you're there, say hello. We're going to be at GoConf, both the Canadian and US one, I think, on the West Coast, over the next couple of months. If you want to find me, you can find me at matt@manifold.co. And if you're thinking about trying to turn the technology into a business and you're struggling with figuring out how to do that, then get in touch. We'd love to help this ecosystem grow. And you can always find us at manifold.co online.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Well, listen, for folks, for Aaron and myself, thank you, Matt, for being on today. We really, really appreciate it. Folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks as always for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating the show on iTunes and wherever else you get your podcasts. So with that, we'll wrap it up and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.